Recording has been started.
Good morning, our viewers in United States, and good evening to our viewers in India and South Asia and wherever they are. We are here again with yet another roundtable discussion organized by the team Council for Strategic Affairs. Today's topic is very, very important, and we are going to be talking about China's mercantile and economic subversion in South Asia. Usually, we have our roundtable discussions on second Monday at 8 p.m., but because both our distinguished panelists are from India, we decided to change the time so that we could, accommodate and not put undue sort of inconvenience to them. So we decided Saturday morning so that people from both US and India can join without any inconvenience. So here I put a map of South Asia region that we are going to be talking about. And there is some problem with this map because this is not cartologically correct from Government of India's point of view, but I'm just using it to show the region that encompasses uh, South Asian, so-called, geopolitically defined South Asian region that includes Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Myanmar. So that is actually the South Asian region that we see geopolitically. And this is the second map, which is somewhat cartologically correct. It's from, this is an Indian map from Maps of India, which shows the boundaries of India with the LOC and LAC sort of depicted, and it shows India's boundary with Tibet. So I don't need to tell you where we are coming from here. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. Council for Strategic Affairs imparts education in the field of international relations. CSA fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness, and CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. We have monthly roundtable discussions, and now most likely we'll be doing on second Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. Eastern Daytime. We have a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert, and we have very, distinguished domain experts who have given those monthly lectures. CSA also organizes symposia, meetings, conferences, etc. CSA promotes publications of articles on geopolitics and related subjects. We have recently advertised for a CSA summer internship program for college students, and we are looking for some candidates for that. And our website is just being finalized, so pretty soon, in a week or so, you'll be able to log on to our website. Today's roundtable discussion is on China's mercantile and economic subversion in South Asia. And we have two distinguished panelists, Professor Madhav Das Nalapat, who is Professor of Geopolitics, and Dr. K. Siddhartha, who is a geostrategist. So this is our friendly Dr. K. Siddhartha in his Indian attire. Dr. K. Siddhartha is a strategic thinker, geostrategist, knowledge and perception management consultant who is based in Noida in UP, which is basically part of Delhi NCR. He has been an advisor to international government agencies. He is sought after for his advisory roles with different governments and national and international institutions. He has been a mentor of international repute, having had a hand in mentoring almost 1,600 successful students for Indian civil services. He's a distinguished thought leadership trainer, an earth scientist of international stature with pioneering research in paleographic reconstruction. He is an author of 44 books and really an educationist par excellence. So that is our first distinguished speaker. Our second distinguished speaker for this panel is Professor Madhav Nalapat. And Professor Madhav Nalapat has been to CSA forums before, both as distinguished speaker as well as panel member. He was appointed India's first professor of geopolitics in 1999. He heads the first UNESCO Peace Chair in India at Manipal University. He was the editor of Mathrubhumi Daily and subsequently Times of India. He is currently the editor-in-chief of the Sunday Guardian. He has mainly focused on security and defense issues. He is author of many books, the last being Practice of Geopolitics, published by Manipal University Press in 2021. His latest book is on 21st century foreign policy and is being brought out by Rupa Publications. He has worked on a book on great power dynamics in 21st century, which has been completed and will soon be published. His specialization includes diplomacy, foreign policy, comparative politics, international political economy, international organizations, armed conflict, humanitarian practices, and contemporary world history. He teaches courses related to these subjects and has over 900 publications in these domains. His writings have appeared in journals in US, UK, Australia, Canada, India, and his collections of writings can be found out on his website. So some housekeeping rules for our viewers. We would like everyone to mute themselves to avoid noise interference. We would like them to change their cell phone setting to vibration mode only. We would encourage our audience not to interrupt our esteemed speakers because there is a specific question and answer time. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. We don't allow anonymous audience members who join by giving a number or whatever, but don't identify, they would not be allowed to ask questions. All the questions are to be sent through the chat function, and we will read the questions one by one. If you are asking a question, please be precise and specific in asking the question. Don't send comments in the form of a lecture or a monologue, then we will not take that particular question. And lastly, we are definitely recording this event. It will be available on our YouTube channel within 24 hours. We are taking steps now that there will be a simultaneous broadcast on YouTube and Facebook, probably from the next session onwards. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our distinguished panelists, starting with Dr. K. Siddhartha, who will be speaking on China's mercantile and economic subversion in the South Asia region, followed by Dr. Siddhartha. Professor Madhav Nalapat will take the stage. And after that, we will have a lively interactive discussion. And since we are doing this in morning, we will have plenty of time for our discussions. So, Dr. Siddhartha, the stage is yours. You have approximately 15 minutes to give your presentation.
Thank you, Adityanjee. Thank you so much. Thanks to the CSA family. Thanks to Ankushi for introducing me here. And of course, our teacher-like personalities, Ambassador Kapoor, Professor Madhav Nalpat. It is an honor to share the topic with Professor Nalpat right now. If I overtop the topic by 2-3 minutes, please excuse me in that manner. Well, as I see the topic, China's economic and political profile has expanded unusually quickly in recent years. But many countries lack local experts which can match the analysis of the implications of Chinese actions and its policy recommendations. Geopolitically, the rise of China has altered the dynamics of the post-war to such an extent that it drove many countries, especially Asian countries, to take a special cognizance of the changed reality of the world. China have pursued two different but related strategies to make countries subservient and dominate them. When the Chinese intent on making a region subservient, they wage a war. And in this process, they make sure that they are everywhere to wear the country out and bring it on their own terms. The Chinese, as the world has discovered, do not only fight a war on the borders, they have mastered thousands of ways to make any country subservient, and in that process, they have altered the complete meaning of a war as well. Now, this includes the type of physical war, perception war. We have information war, bio war, economic war, cyber war, and unfortunately, India is in the midst of experiencing a multi-dimensional war, and it has been fighting it since 1959. Psychological warfare for Chinese is all about perception management. That entails changing the way that you go on to perceive this information. Chinese Communist Party has a saying, when it comes to psychological warfare, is strangle them with their own system. And in this tactic, Chinese observe how different countries operate, find how is it that the different countries function, what are their demerits, what are the pitfalls in their functioning, and they contemplate how to use the same system, that is the system under which the countries are functioning, to cause chaos, to mess around things, and this is how they exactly strangle you with your own system. China is also going to fight a media warfare, and that is all about the manipulation and control of the outlets of information, which has the potential to influence not just the news media, but also the social media or any type of a media that they can go on to bring up among the large section of people. India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, all have been bearing the brunt of it. The legal warfare is the manipulation of the international legal system by virtue of China being a permanent member of a UNSC and a heavyweight in a WHO as well. China will be able to avert any type of an international inquiry if it is going to be into the deeds and misdeeds of the Chinese people. Now, to make a country subservient, the Chinese begin by identifying vulnerable countries. That is going to be on the one hand, and the local capacity to manage and mitigate political and economic risks of any type of a challenge on the other hand. Now, in these countries, the tools and tactics of China's adventurism and activism activities remain poorly understood among the local experts and also the elites as well. And their policies too often transposes Western solutions. That is, how is it that this can be dealt in a Western manner, and which is not actually well adapted to the realities which the Chinese go on to be so expert in. South Asia falls in this line. The Chinese reach South Asian countries professionally by identifying opportunities to make offers without waiting for the country to ask first. China employs a repertoire of means to wield influence in this region. And that can go on to be, it includes a leverage, the dependence on the extent of engagement of the country to the robustness of country's institutions, how strong these institutions are, and also China's personal relationship with key decision makers and policy makers, who can go on to forget a Rajapaksa case. Now, China frequently couples its use of economic and political carrots and levers into broad-ranging political relations outreach, also public relations outreach as well. When China floods a country, it makes it sure that it's going to be flooded in every possible sense. So it is with investment, a strategic message designed to influence public opinion, also in relation to leaving little amount of a space left for any type of a counter narrative to take place, and particularly in those countries which lack an independent media or have weak civic societies. One of the critical factors enabling China to escalate its engagement with so many South Asian countries at once is its willingness to make frequent offers and frequent proposals. Connectivity and infrastructure projects are on the top of the wish list of the Chinese. And all the Southeast Asian states have now become a key area of cooperation with the Chinese. China's main asset in its economic levers of influence, and Chinese act as a proactive in wielding such type of influence. And these economic engagements serve Chinese strategic ends and helps expand its influence in a region that has traditionally been considered as India's domain and a strategic backyard as well. Now, needless to say, China's economic interests move ahead with a veiled agenda. The agenda can be in the form of incentive or threats. It can be used to deter or compel both the state and non-state actors in focus countries. Coercive threats have been used as a tool of negative influence in several ways, like including over-the-horizon threats and lead local actors and self-censors as well by the media as well, who start doubting themselves about it. So whenever Chinese arrive, they arrive with all their wars, all their war tactics, be it tangible or be it intangible. In the most vulnerable countries, civil societies and academia are often too fragile to provide a balanced coverage about the intent of the Chinese and the activism and the external powers that the Chinese are able to wield. And one of the most well-known extensions of the Chinese economic policy have been trade-off using water and Belt Road initiative that exploit these type of vulnerabilities. Now, water war has been one of the most sought after war by the Chinese in this case, and they have been waging it as an intangible instrument adopted by Chinese to make some of these countries subservient. And in lieu of providing hydropower and establishing hydropower plants, Chinese have kept 10 countries to a ransom. And unless there is a realization that these countries affected by Chinese control of Tibetan water flow are they come under the ambit of India, an umbrella of India, they will always go on to remain subservient. In South Asia, China is relatively new entrant and is yet to clearly understand the institutions and organizational cultures on the focus countries. Thus, these countries are still figuring as to how Beijing thinks. And these divergences account for the dissonance and diplomatic foxbox that is often visible with the Chinese. Now, various initiatives taken by the Chinese go on to reflect this reality. And one is Belt and Road Initiative, that is CPEC. China's Belt Road Initiative is a way for China to expand its global influence by making countries economically dependent on it, often through debt trap diplomacy that we have known Chinese practicing it for so long a time. Almost all of India's neighbors are part of China's Belt Road Initiative, which surround, and they also go on to intend to surround India from every possible side. BRI and CPEC in Pakistan could open a direct trade between China and Indian Ocean with an attendant benefit all along the belt, such as dozens of high-profile projects like Gwadar, a free trade zone and a port, and a railway from Peshawar to Karachi, two hydroelectric plants in the occupied Kashmir region, a metro system in Lahore, the establishment of multiple economic zones, and fiber optic cables running all the way from China to Pakistan. Whether the project will have a desired economic impact is questionable, because Pakistan presents a number of social and economic problems that will create barriers for the ultimate success of the project. Pakistan continues to be plagued by high levels of corruption. It has an extremely hierarchical and rural feudal class system with poor education facilities in the region, ethnic, tribal rivalries, and Islamic extremism, to name few of them. But the very basic nature of Pakistani society, the lack of a centralized leadership in this case, and with a decentralized government structure, is always going to be seen with a greater power of autonomy that has been provided to the provinces, and that creates a problem in implementation of BRI. Of course, that is aided by big urban-rural divide and discontent as well that goes on to follow it. CPC is already facing Pakistan's regional and ethnic differences and its attendant conflict. Balochistan, which is the outlet to Persian Gulf and full of natural resources, feels alienated from the Pakistani power structure, and thus a number of militant Baloch nationalist groups have been causing trouble. Baloch nationalists opposed the project as it could ultimately turn the whole of demographic balance against them, and other ethnic groups may go on to move into the province. Then China's overcapacity in cement, glass, steel, and manpower has been pouring in incessantly into Pakistan. Most of Pakistanis are blinded by their hatred towards India, and they are mortgaging tomorrow's future and is seen, and of course they go on to see it right now in a form of a reverse colonization as well. China will benefit from the project. There is no doubt on that part, and lendings are going to be almost in commercial terms, including overhead charges of debt to service equity ratio of around 80-20 and return guarantees of 17. Just imagine that part. Pakistan's benefit from the project is not clear as much as China's it is, and we cannot go to conclude our evaluation of the BRI contribution to Pakistan economy, but Pakistan is unable to pay its debt, which ultimately will be, and it will have a large chunk of land being lent back to the Chinese people. So Chinese will be able to capture this time. And this is what BRI is going to be all about. Pakistan, economics of hatred works in that manner. God save them. In other countries, Asian countries, the engagements go on to be very different. Chinese influence in other South Asian countries have been high-value project finance and operations partnership, not least in the Hambantota region, Colombo Port project, or the Padma multi-purpose project that has been in Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, China has been an ideal partner for Bangladesh to expand its manufacturing base and also to cater to diverse export markets and to overcome infrastructure gaps through project finance and construction also. China is not among Bangladesh top 10 export partners, but it has allowed 97% of Bangladeshi goods duty-free access to its domestic market since June 2020. Now, more importantly, it is helping the country to diversify its export base and move its industry to the value chain as well. The energy segment, our energy sector has been the most important recipient with Bangladeshi companies establishing joint ventures with the Chinese counterpart. Rising economic engagement has been accompanied by, of course, heightened political coordination as well as cultural coordination, because this is how Chinese are establishing a good number of their projects in Bangladesh, and they are allowing a huge amount of cultural compatibility as well in this case. In Nepal, Nepal has sought Chinese aid for major projects like the Pokhara International Regional Airport and cross-border optic fiber link as well, the upper Marsanmandi hydropower project, the Kerum-Kathmandu cross-border region as well, and one of the most crucial regions which have been as a part of lending to the Chinese. Now, as in Bangladesh, China has facilitated technology transfer to Nepal, creating a perception and reality of aiding wealth creation, and Chinese and Nepalese are getting fooled by that. Everyone goes on to know that. And of course, Chinese going to talk about expanding employment also in the same place. The COVID-19 pandemic has allowed China to advance its vision of a health Silk Road to Nepal, working on the Chinese model against COVID-19. That will be a joke. On best practices, that is again a joke, to handle the pandemic using Chinese testing kits and other equipment. China is desirous of constructing and repairing dams on the Indo-Nepalese border, and that is going to be a real concern because these dams are going to be used for water storage and ultimately to cause floods and drought the way Chinese going to want in India, plus impairing the productivity of a very rich fertile rice belt in the whole of Bihar and West Bengal region as well. In Sri Lanka, the flagship of Chinese economic engagement, which has been the flagship of Chinese economic engagement, the most important projects have been that of Hambantota and Colombo City project, known as CHEC project. Colombo is the largest recipient of foreign investment from China to the tune of $1.4 billion, and it promises to create something like some 1 lakh permanent jobs once completed. But the relationship Chinese go on to be having with Sri Lanka is going to be much more layered and diverse than what the narrative goes on to suggest. China's importance as a lender, investor, trader, builder, and partner is guided by Sri Lanka's own economic progress that has helped and to it to graduate to lower in middle income class group by 2017 and out of ambit of Asian Development Bank soft loan to qualify for soft loan from Asian Development Bank. Sri Lanka has felt compelled to diversify its resources of capital and turning substantially towards international bond markets. The share of the Chinese loans, of course, have kept on increasing inextensively. For China, the country has offered a friendly stepping stone for them to expand its presence in South Asia, particularly Indian Ocean. And because it represents a potential strategic asset which is lying astride the sea lanes of communication through which China's energy supply from Middle East passes. Coupled with the academic, journalistic exchanges that China is going to be having China is by and large isolating Sri Lanka, or Sri Lanka itself is getting isolated on its own project area and is going to be through its worst economic crisis in the recent years, aided and abetted by the Chinese. The Chinese obstinacy to ask for an immediate and emergency payment, the inferior quality of fertilizers that they supplied, and the growing interference are pointers towards how much subservient Chinese can go on to be in Sri Lanka. Chinese have made Sri Lanka, despite adequate institutional capacity, it has not been able to take care of itself and is looking for India's help right now. In Maldives, there are inadequate institutional capacity. What the Chinese did was they opened Maldives to corruption, particularly for accepting kickbacks from contractors to keep contract prices high and to make it very vulnerable. State coffers have lost several billions of rupiah undue to embezzlement and corruption charges in this case, and that has been very, very bad for Chinese. Particularly, it is going to be reflected in Chinese Maldives Friendship Bridge, which has created a lot of environmental and economic problems in that place. Now, the fact that Chinese subcontractors are illegally mining sand, claiming that it was permitted, goes on to show that the state agencies, that is implementation agencies, or the oversight of the state, the regulatory bodies, are not completely functioning in its full form. The Maldives-China Free Trade Agreement has fallen by wayside, and Chinese practices only helped corrupt practices go unnoticed, helping it to increase its ransomware hold over Maldives even more. The way Chinese institutions have offered loans to the Maldivian individuals and companies backed by the sovereign guarantee from the Maldivian state has brought Maldives to a real pathetic state. And this kind of arrangement will be almost impossible in a strong state like, of course, Sri Lanka. But then Sri Lanka is also going to be facing some type of music right now. Now, while the Chinese have used these means in different countries, the Chinese have also used tourism to lure the Sri Lankans, and other countries have seen its influence to a lot of education-related initiatives. For example, several Confucius institutes have opened in Sri Lanka and also in Bangladesh in very, very quick succession. In Nepal, the multiple schools have made Chinese language courses compulsory, and after the Chinese offered to cover the salaries of the teachers involved in this region. Nepal's Tribhuvan University has signed agreements to establish Confucius institutes. In recent years, China has also launched multiple initiatives to develop what is called as soft influence that includes folklores, cultural programs, exchange with the think tanks, and whatnot. China have been using scholarship as a tool to influence the minds of the young people in this region. The ultimate aim of China in this case is to wean away from the traditional destination of choice of these regions, which used to be India, towards itself, and influence the minds of the youngest students in this case, so that they can go on to be a part of the market. They can also go on to be a part of a troublemaker as well. A soft power approach will impact the region market without any doubt, and Chinese are going to be using it as a weapon. But of course, not everything is going to be so cozy for it, because despite common misperceptions, South Asian countries have rejected specific offers, not always cowed by the dominating nature of the Chinese, and that has been in that has been in some places like Sonadia Deep Sea Project has been one of them in Bangladesh. It has been also in a Rohingya conflict in Myanmar, where they do not go into match with where the views don't go to match with the Bangladeshi. The Nepalese Electricity Authority had terminated a contract for them as well in this case. But in general, these developments demonstrate that a Chinese presence in South Asia is no longer predominantly economic, but involves a greater multidimensional effort to enhance its posture and further its long-term strategic interest in the region. Part of the challenge facing South Asian states is the rapid flow of the Chinese money and the exponential increase in the Chinese influence over the last decades or so. Now, what has happened is that in the background of three pronounced vulnerabilities that these regions have. One is brittle state institutions, second is weak civil society, and the third is a high potential for elite capture and corruption. Chinese are only looking to exploit these type of vulnerabilities more and more and take it further. In all of these cases where the Chinese actors are unable to immediately identify fresh opportunities for collaboration, they offer to improve upon the host countries' existing collaborations with the third countries. In Nepal, for instance, China's forays as a development partner often involved offering large versions of projects that India was already working on, promising to complete them faster than India could, and that too at a lower cost. Unless India offers some better and valid freebies with the best of the professional services, minimum bureaucratic interference and delays, and unless India develops more muscles, it is going to get surrounded more and more. China will keep usurping these type of contracts. Of course, India has made a headway. The Western Container Terminal contract in Sri Lanka has been a vector of development, and that is at least some 6-7 times bigger than that of the Eastern Container Terminal. It is the governments of South Asia that have pulled China closer in many instances, and they see it is as a clear benefit. But then they are paying a price for it. India has to make itself more worthy in form of packages, simplicity of execution with the advantage of English-speaking population and a cultural affinity, plus a working environment that is going to be very, very similar. And most of those professionals can go settle, and of course, they can always go to get married as well in that place. That is going to be another extension of soft power. But as a small countries that is, we are talking about Bangladesh, Maldives, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, they're unable to export explicitly and choose a relationship with bigger powers in a very different manner. It is essentially a very good strategy for a small country to go for all in with just one major country, leaving themselves inside a block and reducing their options and opportunities. So what they're doing is that they're playing with both India and China in a different manner altogether, allowing both of them to have a fight with it, allowing both of them also to have a go at each other as well. And that is the way that they are trying to reach and reap benefits also in this case. That is the present state of subservience and some amount of exceptions in this case.
Siddhartha, can you please conclude?
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Dr. Siddhartha, for that wonderful presentation. I'm sorry we are short of time, so I had to cut you short, but I'm sure we will have very enlightened discussion on after the presentations are over. Let me take this opportunity to invite Professor Madhav Nalapat. I may tell our audience that Professor Madhav Nalapat is currently in a village area where connectivity is very poor. He is joining us from his cell phone. So the video, because of the bandwidth issues, will not be there, but he will be speaking using his cell phone. And Floor is yours, Professor Madhav Nalapat. Glad to have you back on our forum.
Thank you very much, Aditya. I think, more than seeing a speaker, I think hearing the speaker is possibly the more important. And that is where in India, there's always hope. You have problems, but there's always hope. And there are always good solutions that are possible. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this manner. I just want to say that, we have heard Dr. Siddhartha has been extremely, if I may say so, a very scholarly presentation and an extremely comprehensive presentation on China, what is regarded as, quote unquote, the Chinese threat. And of course, we're restricting this to South Asia, but the Chinese attempt at expanding its footprint is global. It's not just connected with South Asia, but it's global. So, but then the point is, let us understand that as you know very well, as Dr. Siddharth knows very well, the reality is that China, when you talk about China, just as when we talk about Pakistan, we're talking about the Pakistan army. And the Pakistan army is basically means one single province, and that to a particular part of a single province. When we talk about China, we're talking about the Communist Party of China, which is roughly about 100 million people, of which I would say about 3/4 are there only because they have to be there. Without that, quite honestly, they will not be able to progress in their careers. But and the Communist Party of China, essentially, what does it mean? It means the Central Committee, it means the Standing Committee, and eventually it means the Office of the General Secretary. The power and influence of the Office of General Secretary today has reached a level where I would say the historical parallel is the office of the General Secretary in the time of the Stalinist period, when Stalin accumulated all powers in the office of General Secretary, and essentially with the passing away of Lenin, despite some very adverse remarks about him by Lenin in his final testament, the other leaders accepted him because of the fact that were so reliant on him and his office for so many activities, and this office has got involved into practically all the activities which are of significance to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Today, Xi Jinping is trying to a similar kind of approach. Whether it will succeed or not, time will tell. But the Office of General Secretary, when we define China, we are talking about policy, we are talking about the Office of General Secretary, and essentially we are talking about the General Secretary's view of what policy is or should be or what China should be. Now, as I think as we all know, the Chinese project, the Communist Party project, is an ethnocentric project. Now, it's not the first ethnocentric project. You've had ethnocentric projects in Spain. You had them in the British Isles. You had them in the United States also. The Manifest Destiny, if you remember, the Monroe Doctrine, the Manifest Destiny presumption that Americans are special people, English are special people, Spanish are special people. When we talk about Napoleon, French are special people. So that kind of an ethnocentrism is there, alive and strong in the Chinese project. Why it has become a little less, if I may say so, much less marked in the other countries that I've named, is because there is so much of migration from outside those particular ethnic groups to these different countries. You look at the United States, you look at Britain, you look even at Germany, you look at France. There's so much external migration, external to France and external to the European continent. So it's not possible to have a viable ethnocentric project in any of these countries anymore. But in the case of China, it is overwhelmingly hard. I mean, whether you have Pakistan army generals who are who are very friendly to China and who have made a lot of money out of China, I don't think very many of them would like to settle down in China. I don't think so. They would like to settle down in the UK or the United States or Australia. Canada is very cold, but yes, Canada also. Not too many, if there are any, will want to settle down in China. The point is that it is an ethnocentric project that is, in terms of parameters, potentially viable. In a way, the ethnocentric project is no longer viable in the countries, many of the countries that had that kind of project in previous centuries and may even till very recently. So that is one thing which distinguishes China from the other great powers. Major, I mean, India, China, Russia, and the United States, as I see it, these are the four major powers in the globe. Russia doesn't seem like a major power now. India also, to many people, does not seem like a great power. But the reality is both Russia potentially and India, hopefully not very long afterwards, will will reach the status in which everybody acknowledges India as one of the four great powers of the world. But having said that, let me say that the weight of our past errors of strategy are very heavy upon us. And Dr. Siddhartha and you, I mean, Aditya, we talked about the India-Tibet border. Well, the reality is today that I'm not sure that the Tibetan population in Tibet is in a majority or not. My suspicion is it is not. And certainly the Tibetans have, if you look at, let's say, 100% control over Tibet, the Tibetans share in that particular control, and the Han share in that particular control will be about 97% and 3%. And that 3% will basically be dealing with issues which are not of very much immediate relevance to China's neighbors or too much of China itself. So this is the situation. Now, China is heading for a water famine. There's no question about it. China is already having major problems regarding electric power supply, etc., etc. And when you're talking in terms of a potential water famine, and you're talking in terms of huge projects under construction and plan on the Tibetan plateau, well, that water is got to be diverted from somewhere else. And the problem, we're talking in terms of South Asia, we're talking about countries that are very friendly to China. Pakistan is very friendly to China. They have made some gestures towards Bangladesh. All that is fine. But if they really start diverting waters, it is going to be the whole of South Asia that is affected. So at least from the point of view of a common approach towards water and to a sharing of water on the lines, I mean, I don't think anybody will be as generous as India was in the Indus Water Treaty. India gave away more in that one treaty than every other water treaty in the world between the lower and upper riparian states combined. We gave away more in that single treaty. I mean, there must have been good reasons for that. I don't know what they are, but I have no idea what they are. But the point is, I doubt the Chinese are going to be anywhere near as generous at all. Why? It's an ethno-centered project. And may I point out something which, I know that both you and Dr. Siddharth know this very well. The Chinese governance construct has been built, in the case of Mao Zedong, it was built on the question of establishing dominance of the Han over the outlying territories, quote unquote, Manchuria, Tibet, Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Outer Mongolia somehow, fortunately till now, has managed to stay out of their clutches. And of course, eventually taking over of large territories in the present Russian Federation. But that was the Mao project, that the Han are going to be the masters of a huge landmass, more than double the landmass controlled by any emperor in previous dynasties. Any emperor in previous dynasties, the effective control would have been about less than half, about 40 to 43 or 44% of what the People's Republic of China became under Mao. That was Mao's project. And he told the Chinese people it's going to be very painful. He made it very, very painful indeed. But you have to bear with me for the sake of this, of establishing this country as, and you as a Han people, as the overseers, as the masters, if I may say so, of a huge area in which other nationalities are there. And that project was done by Mao. Xi Jinping's project is similar in the sense, except that it's not just a question of what is the current territorial expansion. It's a question of the Indo-Pacific. It's a question of the Eurasian landmass, and finally, it will be the Atlantic oceans as well. Both sides of the Atlantic, both sides of the Indo-Pacific. This is the goal of China. Now, one of the issues that is that basically, General Secretary Xi Jinping, and if I may say so, I have had the good fortune of visiting Beijing several times. I've also had the good fortune of meeting individuals who are very close to Xi Jinping and who advise him. So I think I'm glad that I've got that opportunity. The problem is that if you're going to do a Mao in today's era, after Deng Xiaoping came to power and said to get rich is glorious, and after the immense increase in per capita income, immense increase in in individual incomes and livelihoods, and if you go to China, you will see that is not really a fantasy. It is true. It is there. There is an immense increase in people's livelihoods. We can talk a lot about this problem, banking problem, housing problem, but the reality is that is an economy that has made huge progress. And that today, when Deng Xiaoping began his economic planning, as this has been said before, it will probably be said again, India and China were roughly equal in terms of economic size. Today, we are about 1/5 of China. So they have gone a very long way. The point is that the implicit agreement between the party, which means the party leadership, and the people, has been economic progress. The agreement is that you forget about politics, you forget about so-called freedoms of the West, etc. We will give you prosperity, and it's not the only time. I mean, I know that a lot of people in China will obviously object to that, but I would like to say, for example, we saw a country in Europe. I'm not going to name that country, where you had a very, very strong dictatorship, a dictatorship that was really pushing that country towards confrontation with other countries. Why did the people of that country go with the dictatorship? Because after many years of economic hardship, of unemployment, of having no dinner, no breakfast, no lunch, starvation in many cases, under that dictator, they had jobs. They could have good dinner, good breakfast, good lunch. And as a consequence, they followed that dictator until, the complete destruction of that particular country for the time being. Of course, it revived subsequently in a new avatar. But what I'm trying to say is that, we're talking in terms of, for example, the Arab Spring. Now, I've analyzed this very clearly, and as soon as the Arab Spring came, within a few weeks, if not less, I said very clearly that this is going to be a Wahhabi winter. You call it Arab Spring, it's going to develop the Wahhabi winter. And in Egypt, you saw the Wahhabi elements come and take charge. In other countries also, they tried to take charge. Unfortunately, it took a lot of effort, but that if I may say so, those waves of Wahhabi power have been pushed back with great effort. What I want to say very, very clearly is that I'm not very certain the Chinese people will be happy to have lower living standards and to go in through the tribulations that they underwent during the time of Mao Zedong. But what Xi Jinping is trying to say is a grand project. Mao's grand project was this greater China, if I may say so, the greater territorial thing of China, except for Taiwan and some parts here and there that they claim under the One China doctrine, including some parts that belong to India and that are Indian. And that's why I'm always a bit surprised when I hear somebody say in China or anyway we completely subscribe to the one China doctrine, because that means you're basically subscribing to a doctrine that posits that many parts of your territory are not yours, which of course they are. So I would only like to say that his point is, we are the chosen people. Like at one time, if I say so, Americans regarded themselves as the chosen people. The British regarded themselves as the chosen people. The Spanish, the French regarded themselves as the chosen people. The Chinese leadership is telling them, we are the chosen people, and this leadership, the Office of General Secretary, and the paraphernalia associated with it, will lead you to the mastery of the situation in which China once again becomes the leading and masterly power in the world, in which everybody is in a sense dominated by China. You know, the emperor never received a single gift. They were all supposed to be tributes from tributary states. Whichever country gave him the gift, whichever, I mean, in fact, there is a royal family in India, in the south of India, that has exchanged gifts to the emperor for quite some time. The emperor sent them gifts, and they sent the emperor gifts back. But those gifts were not taken as gifts; they were taken as tribute, because in that mentality, it is tribute. Either you dominate, or it's not worth anything else. So that mindset is a very strong substratum of the psychology. And that substratum is what the General Secretary Xi Jinping is trying to develop, because he is quite aware of the what he says are the short-term problems. It may be 3 years or 5 years or 6 to 7 years, but he says in that time we will break through all these obstacles. And now you've got a narrative in which every country is against China. It's not India that is being aggressed by China. It is India that is the aggressor against China. It is America that is the aggressor against China. It is Britain that is the aggressor against China. It is Australia that is the aggressor against China. It is even Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia that are the aggressors against China. Look, the point is, you and I may take this, but it cannot be taken lightly, because the reality is that this does enter into a very specific vein. And what Xi Jinping is gambling on is that that particular vein will see him through hardships, turmoil, policy errors, in the same way as a lot of the turmoil, hardships, and policy errors of the Mao era were tolerated by Chinese people. Even today, I mean, so much has come out about Mao, including in China. But even today, he is venerated by the Chinese people for the establishing of that greater China. And Xi Jinping is hoping that he will be similarly venerated, despite all the pain that this is causing, and despite all the tension that this is causing. Now, some of us have been very candid about what is needed to confront this reality. Others have sought to, in a sense, ignore the reality. But in any case, in my view, this is an immense gamble that is being taken by General Secretary Xi Jinping. And that gamble is based on the position that the Chinese people will accept sacrifices, provided they are reasonably certain. And what he is saying is, I am the only leader who can get all this for you. No other person can. Only I can. Just as, for example, Mao said, I am the only leader who can bind all these different disparate parts together in such a way that they never leave Greater
Mr.
China.
Nalapat, we are running short of time. Can you conclude, please?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that, we're talking about South Asia. South Asia is important only from the point of view, the Chinese point of view, of India. India they see as a peer competitor, and South Asian countries are useful to them to the extent to which you can create problems for India. So from that, allow me to conclude on that basis. But I would really like to say we have a huge existential challenge on our hands. It's an extremely serious challenge, and they have been doing a lot of planning, a lot of strategizing, and a lot of activity. And I think that needs to be matched by India and by other countries that are opposed to replacement of one one unipolar world with another unipolar world.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Nalapat. Despite you being in the rural area and connectivity issues, such a wonderful geopolitical exposition about Chinese intentions. And if I go back to history, I will say that Chinese were the original imperialists, not neo-imperialists. They were the original imperialists because if you read the history, Chinese emperor was the original god king. The divinity flowed to the Chinese emperor, and of course, everyone else was a barbarian and vassal states. And if you see China's history, the original landmass of China was very small, and over periods of cycles, they conquered the neighboring areas and expanded. So they are the original imperialists without actually claiming to be so and deceiving other people about their intentions. And since we are talking about South Asia, the first country that bore the brunt of China was Tibet. And I keep on bringing it back because I have two young Tibetan lawyers in the audience sitting here. And at some point in time, we'll have some comments from that. Professor Nalapat, in the Tibet region at this point in time, Hans outnumber Tibetans. Hans are more than 7 million. Original Tibetans are only 6.5 million. So yes, Hans have colonized the land of Tibet, and that's not only the ATR, it's the other provinces also. So we need to pay attention to that because that is also geopolitical part of South Asia. Before I open the Q&A, I have a foreign policy expert sitting in the audience, and I'll take the advantage of that. So I'm going to impromptu invite Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor to give some comments on this particular Asia because he had a varied foreign policy career, and we need to get benefit of your presence and your expertise and your wisdom on this particular topic. So Ambassador Kapoor, please.
Very much, Dr. Adityanjee, for doing this very noble work which you're doing, and we will continue to support you completely and your team also. And also to the two panelists who spoke earlier, Dr. Siddhartha and Professor Madhav Nalapat, both of whom I have tremendous respect. Let me start with a personal story to, discuss this very important topic. When I was Joint Secretary SARC in the Ministry of External Affairs, this was around 2005 onwards, I again came across China in a very in-depth manner. I had been coming across China in almost all my postings since my very first posting onwards in very great sort of extent to understand what is their strategy, what are their tactics, how they are going ahead with those steps one by one. So it gave me a good insight. It was a blessing working in the Foreign Service. But as Joint Secretary SARC, we got some intelligence from the Americans and from our own intelligence agencies at the SARC summit in Dhaka, which we were planning, there is going to be a bid by some countries of SARC to include China as an observer. Now, SARC already being in, not one of the best organizations because of the rivalries and problems and Pakistan issues, etc. We had been trying to induct Afghanistan as a member, which we succeeded very well. But as a sort of a counterpoise to that, some countries insisted on bringing China as an observer. So I wrote out a note in the ministry that if China comes in as an observer, then the future of SARC is completely doomed because already it is precarious. So what is our reaction to that? We should invite the US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South Korea, European Union, Germany, France, all of these countries also as observers. So PM agreed, I was given the task, and I started talking with the representatives of these countries, the ambassadors, the political officers, and the embassies in Delhi, to invite them to my office, chat with them, and tell them that, whether now getting America involved in South Asia was a sensitive issue, as everybody knows, because we don't want external interference. So it became a very big thing in WikiLeaks. I became a WikiLeaks star, actually, as one of the people, one of the traitors and a treasonous diplomat who tried to invite US to meddle in South Asian affairs. Because the American diplomats wrote many sort of dispatches to Washington State Department. We are being given this opportunity for the first time, come to South Asia officially, invited by the government of India and Joint Secretary Stark, and we should grab it immediately. Those dispatches got leaked by WikiLeaks. Communist Party of India wrote to the Prime Minister on the instigation of Chinese that this treasonous diplomat needs to be dismissed from service immediately. And I saw this letter also only in WikiLeaks. Nobody asked me, nobody told me anything. So anyway, it was a very interesting story, and it got me a lot of reaction and response from a lot of friends all over the world and in different countries' diplomacies. The second aspect, there were many other incidents which happened at that time, but since we are trying to go ahead with other discussions, I'll keep my remarks brief. The second aspect which I learned was I was in Georgetown University as a professor in 91-92, deputed by the Ministry of External Affairs as the first Indian diplomat to be sent out, or the first Indian government officer to be sent out for a teaching assignment at that age, etc., as a UN fellow. I tried to organize a conference on India-China relations in the post-Cold War era. This was in 91, as you can imagine. That was a big topic. 89, collapse of Soviet Union had just taken place. So India-China relations in the post-Cold War era, where do the two Asian giants go from here? Because nobody, this was the first conference on India-China in the US. Nobody had organized such a thing before. Conference collapsed completely because no speaker came forward to accept the invitation, because he said either I'm an expert on China, which was mostly the case. Some said we deal only with India, we don't know about China. So nobody agreed to speak, and the whole conference collapsed. So I rechanged format completely, kept the same topic. And then when the India-US strategic dialogue was taking place with Adit and Ram, I forget the names now, the IDSA people and others, they came to Washington. I asked Ambassador Abid Hussain and Deputy Ambassador Lalit Man Singh to help me in these efforts. I made the delegation stay on for one day more, and we had the launch of the very famous conference, India-China relations post-Cold War. Where do we go from here? So some panelists spoke on India, some panelists spoke on China, and we had moderators to put it all together, and it went up very well. The point which I'm trying to say is I also learned a lot. I've been learning a lot all my life in this journey. One thing which I learned was that historically, thousands of years back, what was the thinking about India and China? We have heard about the emperors and so many other things, and their ambitions and colonialism and original colonialists, etc. But part of the thinking also was that for any person to be accepted as a real teacher or guru in China, what was the primary necessity? That you go to an Indian university, whether it is Magad or Nalanda or Patliputra or any of our other universities, study there, and then you come back and are recognized as a true teacher. Now, if you see the sources of Indian history also, Payan, Yun Sang, when I went to work in Cambodia as ambassador, again, sources of Cambodian history, Chinese scholars. Where have they studied? In Indian universities. So that was the respect that India had in their psychological framework. This was told to me by one of the Chinese scholars, very old, who was in his last legs. This is where we were, and that's why we have so much of sort of fear about India emerging again as a big thought leader. And that's why we will try to never let that happen. That's why we will challenge it in all ways. So it was one of the things which is very, very interesting for people in this talk particularly like Ankit and others. That's why they denigrate India as a country without any sort of, standing or without any future or whatever. Realizing the power of yoga, the power of meditation, Falun Gong problems they've had, the Tiananmen massacre, etc., because of Falun Gong, all that is related to our original theories and practices of all these aspects. The other aspect I want to just mention here very briefly is my experiences in Nepal as Minister Economic. Again, there were a lot of overlaps, and how they would give just as very specific examples. I would meet a journalist and I would say, they would come home, हिंदी में बात हो रही है, हम कहते हैं उनको, भाई तुमने ये क्या छाप दिया स्टोरी इंडिया के खिलाफ? बोलते सर ये तो रोजी रोटी का हमारा काम है. Or everybody understands Hindi? Should I say it in English?
I think except for one or two people, pretty much everyone's understands.
Yeah, but in the sense that Hindi it's more fun, but in English they would say roji roti ka मामला है. If I write an article against India and it gets published in any newspaper, I take a copy of that newspaper, I go to the Pakistan embassy, I get 3,000 rupees, and I take another copy of the newspaper, I go to the Chinese embassy, and envelope is ready with 5,000 rupees. So those are the sort of low-level tactics which are continuing all over the world in a slightly bigger way now, with Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc., economists, so many of them getting money from China. The other aspect which I saw in depth, when I was in Cambodia as ambassador, I had to organize the first India-ASEAN summit with Prime Minister Vajpayee coming there. And what an experience it was. And so much of efforts by China to sabotage that and to sort of completely derail the process. And why we were able to not let that happen was because all these countries have a cultural overlay of thousands of years, which is the Hindu mind and the Buddhist mind from India. The influence from India is so strong. So I would get feedback and input from Foreign Secretary or other people in Cambodia that this is going to happen next. You please take care of it immediately. And I would send messages to our people in Delhi and they would try to then control it. Like asking some country to do something against India's interest to scuttle the whole process of this coming up as a big India-ASEAN summit. And that's why it became a very big launch and very big event, because we were able to continuously scuttle it. But the point is, I realized what they were doing was, for example, some school principal comes to me as ambassador in Cambodia and says, sir, हमको 1 लाख रुपया चाहिए, हमको ये करना है, function करना है, annual day करना है, आप chief guest बन के आइए and give us a donation from the Indian embassy. Indian embassy does not have those sort of funds. You would go to the Chinese embassy and say the same thing to the Chinese ambassador. What happens as a response? No, we will give you 2 lakhs, not 1 lakh. Plus, we will bring a Chinese teacher, Chinese language teacher from China, and you put it in your school and we will pay for the salary. And we will send the best students who study Chinese from the Nepalese students to China with scholarship or for some workshops, etc., etc., etc. So influencing in the hinterland, this is in rural areas of Nepal also. Creating a Chinese sort of thinking, because their strategy was 100 years, how do we clear out this natural overlay of India and how do we impose and implement a new Chinese overlay. So similarly, they started creating Chinese language radio stations, television stations, newspapers. So the same thing was repeated in what I saw, and I wrote a lot of dispatches, and those were very well appreciated by the government. And what happened as one of the outcomes was that I discussed with the ambassadors of USA, Japan, Australia, UK in Cambodia that no country can challenge strategic onslaught as a single country. And united, maybe we will be able to challenge it. And the word was born out of my discussions with those ambassadors, because all of those ambassadors wrote dispatches. Only the UK ambassador did not write the dispatch because he said, Pradeep, I sent a dispatch already, which talked about other aspects, and now you're telling me this, it is too late, because just last month I got a query from our foreign office asking me what is China doing in Cambodia. I want a detailed dispatch, and I wrote this, which was all different. Now you're telling me this, it's too late. So that's why the Quad consists of only 4, not 5. Otherwise, Britain would have also been part of the original Quad, or Pentagon, whatever it would have been called, Pentagonal Security Dialogue. But that created, because the Japanese Prime Minister looked at the Japanese ambassador's input, accepted that, and then floated the note. And then I got feedback from Delhi that, Pradeep, we want you in this group where these people are going to be talking together, because you have been sending us these sort of dispatches. That group again never came to be, because the next foreign secretary, who had worked in China earlier, was not keen to push forward that policy of getting focused on China and exposing all its machinations. So that
Ambassador
got
Kapoor, can you
unfortunately.
please conclude? We are running short of time.
Sure. So anyway, I have had too many things to say, because in my different postings and as director, additional director general ICWA, there were other experiences. I will conclude here, and will be happy to share those stories at any time, separately also or together.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. Let's not forget that it does not happen just in Nepal and Cambodia. It's happening as we speak right now in India. There are Chinese monies paid to journalists in India, and some of these journalists, I will not name the names, but everyone knows who those journalists are being paid by China, and a couple of them were arrested. So it's happening right now in India. I'm going to take...
Adityanjee, just one point.
Yeah.
What Professor Nalapat mentioned about demographic change, and you also mentioned about it.
Yeah.
Like one example of strategy in Cambodia, they said this 1 lakh acre, we will create a palm oil plantation. In that, we will bring in 10,000 Chinese workers, which we will decide who are the workers. And the instructions to those workers are, when you settle down for a year or two, then you migrate out of that this thing plantation and marry a local Cambodian and settle down there. And they kept on substituting the workers who were slowly disappearing from those plantations. Similarly, they would say that if any Chinese in the border area of Myanmar or Southeast Asia, any countries, goes across the border, sets up a business or a small kirana shop, grocery or whatever, and marries a local lady from that country, we will give you so much money. So that sort of demographic thing, not only in the way it has happened in Tibet, unfortunately, it has happened in a lot of is happening in a lot of Southeast Asian countries, even as we talk.
I take your point. Actually, if you look at the demographics of China, there is a gender imbalance in male to female ratio because of one-child policy, forced abortions, and China's, just like most Asian countries, penchant for a male child successor. So there's a net shortage of women of marriageable age in China. And as Professor Nalapat said, that China's project is an ethnocentric project. Wherever Chinese investment is done, Chinese workers are shipped in, lock, stock, and barrel. All the work is done by Chinese worker who try to settle them in that particular country. And if I go through chat function, first of the comments by Mr. Neil Kenny is that he has observed in his travels in Africa and other countries that there's a lot of hostility and animosity towards Chinese people that are managing these projects. But when he sees the attitude towards Indian, there's much more benevolent and friendly attitude because Indians, either the project managers or the workers, do not have that kind of mentality. So yes, we know that China is doing that kind of thing, not just in Southeast Asia because of their demographic compulsions, but for demographic invasion, as well as to increase their footprint. And thanks for pointing that out. Going back to the chat function, I will take two comments. I have already mentioned Mr. Nilekani's one comment. Second comment is a very specific comment, and he says that control of 8 rivers emanating from Himalayan Tibetan plateau gives China a literal stranglehold over about dozen countries, India included. This is enormous leverage. And then Mr. Nilekani mentions that Professor Brahma Chelani has written a book on this. Actually, that book is called Water Wars in Asia, and it's a very well readable book if anyone wants to pay attention to it. It's not that China will divert water from these rivers emanating from Tibet. They have already started to do that. The Yellow River, the Yangtze River is drying out, so the water from mighty Brahmaputra is being diverted north up to Beijing as we speak at this point in time. It's not a future project, it is happening right now. So it has some significance for all the, not just South Asian countries, but all the Asian countries that are in the littoral, that are in the, distribution of those rivers. So that's one comment I want to make from Mr. Nilekani. Second comment is coming from Dr. Shobha Chokalingam about this tendency about local hostility towards Chinese workers versus some friendly attitude towards Indians in various countries where projects are being taken. So her comment is that India has to capitalize more robustly on that goodwill and should be able to secure more contracts and powers in those countries, and then they should stand by India in case there is some refusal of contracts or something like that. Furthermore, Dr. Shobha Chokalingam says that, we cannot just rely on goodwill. We have to be really competitive. And that's a very valid point. If you look the trajectory of India and China in 1949, when the revolution came, the GDP per capita was pretty much the same. At this point in time, China's foreign exchange reserve is $3.3 trillion. India's foreign exchange reserve is around $650 billion. So they have surplus cash to invest in other countries. And when you have the money, you control the politicians, you control the investment, you control the land, and that is what is happening. Ambassador Kapoor said that, as an ambassador, he could not actually compete with, requests for donations, etc., in wherever countries he went, but the Chinese could do that. And that's the problem we are facing, that China has surplus money. Because of their mercantilistic attitude, they have generated export surpluses. And I think time has come to invoke the Make in India projects and increase the export share of India so that we also develop some exchange reserves, foreign exchange reserves that can be invested not just in South Asian countries, but other countries where we have a sense of competition. So very two good, comments from Mr. Vijay Nilekani and Dr. Shobha Chokalingam. I did say that I'm going to introduce a couple of young Tibetan lawyers who have not put any comments in the chat box, but if they can just introduce themselves and if they want to make any comments to this group, Mrs. Namgal Seki and her husband, Ogian, if you want to put your video on and make some comment, because you are the ones that are affected mostly.
Also have 5 questions, just so you know. I sent it to the Q&A box. Thank
Okay.
you. Just a reminder. Thank you.
Ogian, can you unmute yourself?
Oh, sorry, I was mute. Yeah,
Okay.
I have just typed a question in the chat box. Should I read it out?
Yeah, if you can read it out, I'm trying to find it.
Okay, I have one question regarding the
Winter
Olympic Games.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the Genocide Games. That's just about half a month away. Why do you think that India hasn't yet even announced a diplomatic boycott of it when all the Quad members and other countries have already done it? Even though India is the target of Chinese aggression and is still locked in a border standoff. The wildly held perception that the Modi government is tougher on China than the earlier government. Is it not actually true?
Okay, I will defer this question to Professor Madhav Nalapat. Professor Nalapat.
Yeah, I just want to say, Aditya, that the Modi government is very clear that they don't want to seem like wolf warriors. So the result is that, for example, they don't make too many public comments about China, and even in fact naming China. Although I think quietly behind the scenes, a lot of activity is going on to ensure that India is better prepared to face this massive challenge that it is confronting. Now, whether that is the best policy or not, I leave it to the audience to decide. But but their point is they don't want to seem like an aggressive power. The Chinese and their friends in Pakistan, etc., try to portray India as the aggressor. They don't want through their to seem an aggressive power. So they have been verbally very mild in terms of that, so that it is very clear which is the aggressive power. So that I think has been their strategy.
May I add something to it?
Please.
Go ahead, Dr. Siddhartha.
Yes. Actually, if you're going to take a close look at a Prime Minister Modi's policy, it looks more like to win the war first and then go to battle. This is what exactly that he has been doing. He is organizing himself very well. He is making himself a bit more powerful. He is making himself a bit more robust. Now, Chinese, when they go on, when India goes to take a real stand against China, you know the dangers that the Chinese can go to pose. You have 25 crore phones that can go to incapacitate them. That's a possibility. All out cyber attack, other than what is going to be happening on the border, all out, all out disturbance in the country on the lines of CAA. So right now we are not in a position to fight a war on almost every front. So what we are doing is that we are testing Hyperloop, we are testing Agni missiles, we are testing our satellite weapons, we are testing our BrahMos missile, we are going to spread ourselves in the whole of the world that way. So we are making ourselves a bit stronger every day. Even with respect to Sri Lanka, the western peripheral container part is what exactly that we have taken so far, and that is going to be much bigger than that of the eastern one, and that is far more significant as well. So we are doing it, but we are not saying anything in the public, anything in the press. This is what exactly that has been my observation with respect to that.
Okay, that settles that question. Dr. Shobha, I cannot find your 5 questions. Can you just briefly
Yeah, I
mention
can.
one question, most important one?
Surely. This is about the economic thing. I want to know what the experts think. India has not entered the regional comprehensive economic relation partnership, and how is that going to affect India? It's a 15 nation, 1/3 of the world's economy will be there. It's the world's largest trade deal. And the tariffs are going to come down to zero in the next 10 years. And India is not part of it, and many consider this a grave mistake. And as a corollary, 1B, when can India enter the World Trade Organization to get the same level that China had in the 1980s that catapulted it to this level?
Okay, about the RCEP, there was a great game being played. So there were multiple proposals. One was China's proposal, pet proposal, FTAAP, Free Trade Area for Asia and Pacific. There was a proposal from ASEAN countries for RCEP, and there was a proposal for ASEAN plus 6 that included India historically, and China wanted ASEAN plus 3. India was on board for RCEP from the beginning, but later on, during the negotiations, RCEP did not want to include services. If you just have trade and not services, India's concerns are not allayed. India exports services. So if you are exporting goods and include that as part of trade, but you do not include services that India exports, whether it is software power or other services, teachers, college professors. They are part of, Indian export, brain export. And ASEAN was not willing to look into that. And of course, they had China's backing in that. I think India did the right thing at that point in time, because what would have happened that India-China relationship, the trade imbalance is already in favor of China. China is exporting $98 billion worth of goods to India, whereas India is exporting only 28 billion. So it is heavily in favor of China. Indian economy would have been submerged through second round of RCEP. So that is a wise decision from India's perspective at this point in time, not to allow free access to China. I will let Professor Nalapat and Dr. Siddhartha to opine.
Yes, I think refraining is not the answer. I think India should have muscled up a little bit and say, I mean, excuse me, what's going on? Why is it so one-sided? See, we cannot leave the table. You have to be part of the dialogue, and you have to bring the consensus and say that this is totally against India. And this is where we are strong, and we are the other big power in Asia. We cannot walk away. That's what I'm trying to say. We cannot be so nice that we say, all right, you guys, you have the party and enjoy.
Your sentiments are shared, Shobhaji, but when you do trade deals and your point is not taken, you don't sign on that, and that is what exactly.
Anyways, I know we will definitely. I would love to hear what Professor Siddhartha and Nalapatji and Ambassador Kapoorji would also have to say.
And Dr. Siddhartha, you want to briefly comment on that?
Yes. I just going to put everything in perspective. See, if I go on to be in policy making, that there are four things that I'm going to look for. The first is organizing my country a bit better. Now, at this point of a time with elections around the corner, we have to vie for 2024 central elections as well. This is not the right time for any type of an adventurism at all. Sentiments apart, emotions apart. That's one part. Organizing internally will go on to mean that is bringing maximum number of people under one single narrative, which is, of course, the government may not be doing it, but we are doing it. We are supported by that. We understand that part. That is the first part. Once you set the narrative, the rest of the things go on to fall in place. That's number one. Second part is take care of the MSMEs. Now, MSMEs collapsed after Chinese imports increased after 2005. Now, the collapse of MSME means that almost all of the youthful people are going for government jobs. They are appearing in examination, appearing in competitive examination, and then they are raising the boogie of a backward class and reservations and whatnot, right? So we have to bring to life the whole of the MSME by variety of things, by developing a variety of backward and forward linkages that we can go to forge, and also by identifying a local wisdom and the technology that we can go to use it in different type of agroclimatic zonations. That is, India can go to serve the whole of the world because of the type of climatic and agroclimatic diversity it goes on to have itself. The third part is controlling Indian Ocean as much as possible, because once we are in Indian Ocean, we will be much better equipped to deal with China, or for that matter, any country. Indian Ocean is going to be the ocean of the future, largely because of the littoral states and the population of the littoral states that surround it. So many of the choke points, and almost 60% of the world's population living in this area, with all of them going to be having a manufacturing capacity and a capacity for certain amount of a disruption, small or big. And the fourth part is, of course, spreading the soft power to the whole of the world and getting the goodwill, strengthening the goodwill, so much so that any type of a narrative that we're going to set for the whole of the world, that is something that is going to be heard. And that is the basic reason that the Prime Minister is trying to be very, very mild, to be very rational, so that either the Islamic, so that the organization of Islamic countries or any one of them, they don't going to get any iota of a doubt about the intentions of the Prime Minister, and that we are able to deal with, or we are able to make out a deal such type of India, Israel, UAE deal more and more of sorts.
I think we are running out of time, so I'll take one last question, and that question is from Mr. Hardam Tripathi. Hardam, please go on.
Morning, everyone. My name is Hardam Tripathi, and I just want to thank our speakers today. And my question today is for either Ambassador Kapoor or Professor. I just wanted to see, based on a U.S. perspective and based on the perspective of having a joint alliance with India and the United States, what strategies can they take to combat Chinese influence in the region? We've seen a lot of the islands showing up in the South China Sea and whatnot. There's a lot of interactions between the United States Navy and well as with the geopolitical strategies that India is using. My question ultimately is, what strategies in the future can Secretary Blinken and this Secretary of State and its administration take in conjunction with Narendra Modi's administration to combat or limit the amount of influence that China does have in the South China Sea and in the Southeast region? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Maybe Dr. Siddhartha or Professor Nalapat would like to say anything from this perspective.
Actually, I think Ambassador Kapoor would be ideal for this. I would only like to say about RCEP that I think Dr. Shobha need not worry too much. India has signed de facto or de jure bilateral free trade deal with most of the members of RCEP. So from that point of view, the main beneficiary of RCEP it would be China. And Chinese already are, frankly, as has correctly been said, destroying a lot of industry in India because they offer 5, 10, 15% cheaper. And then a lot of our people go in and buy them, and our own industries suffer. So this additional advantage will be given to them. So I just want to say a lot of free trade agreements have been signed by India, de facto or de jure. So it's really not that the entire party is saying, is unhappy with us. One country is unhappy with us because they want to basically, instead of just $90 billion of surplus, they wouldn't mind $120 billion surplus.
Ambassador Kapoor, please.
Thank you very much for the question, Hardam. It's a very valid question. I'm here in the US, so I can sort of interact a lot with the policymakers here also and learn a lot here in the process. What I feel will help the two countries to sort of advance their, relationship in a strong footing are the following. Firstly, US in particular has to learn to listen a little more and talk a little less. That will help a lot, because once they listen, because as Deputy Secretary Americas in the Ministry of External Affairs in Delhi, American delegations would come and put the agenda on the table. Agenda is not even approved by the Indian side and start discussing the agenda. Now, Indian bureaucrats not sort of mentally accept that sort of attitude. So they would lock the files into a cupboard and tell me, Ambassador, why have you wasted our time? Tell me. You understand? So they have to learn that. So both the countries have to empathize with each other, talk with each other, dialogue with each other. Okay, with serious open-mindedness. That is the first aspect. The second aspect is the diaspora of India in the US is a very powerful entity in this process of dialogue between the two countries. Utilize that a lot more, because the diaspora is well connected in India and in the US also. They are in the IIT club in the US is probably one of the most powerful clubs in the US today, in terms of its access, in terms of its campaigning, donations, in terms of so many other aspects. So utilize those. American diaspora in India is increasing very significantly, and American diplomats who have worked in India become great ambassadors for India and the US. Utilize that and increase the American diaspora in India. That will be another aspect. And understand, and then sort of already we are doing a lot together in terms of joint military work and operations and intel and so many other areas. Keep on expanding that work with every meeting, with every interaction, with every delegation going to India or to USA, and keep on monitoring that what is the additionality, what have you achieved which is beyond what was already there. So that sort of attitude by the policymakers, because in India also there are people who are not completely acceptable of this fact that US is our future partner completely. Now, more and more people getting into that mind frame and paradigm will make India-US relation the basic, primary, and deciding partnership for the 21st century.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Kapoor. And like all good things, this roundtable discussion has to come to an end. Otherwise, we'll stay here for 24 hours because there will be questions and there will be multiple viewpoints. We appreciate everyone. I really want to thank our distinguished speakers, Professor Nalapat and Dr. Siddhartha. I also want to thank some of our distinguished audience members, including Ambassador Kapoor. I'm also thankful to all the people, whether from US or from India, who joined us in this wonderful discussion, gave a lot of comments in the chat function. We really appreciate your sincerity and your commitment. And we will be back like usual. Every month we do 2 events, a roundtable discussion and a distinguished lecture by a domain expert. So on January 29th, we will have a distinguished lecture by a domain expert. I'm not going to disclose it right now. Let that be a surprise. The announcement will start coming in. Please join along with your friends and have, wonderful education on strategic affairs and security issues. I will also like to thank my CSA team, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori and Mr. Ankush Bhandari, for making this possible. And with thanks to everyone, I'm going to end this meeting now. Namaskar.
Namaskar.